A Tale of Two Sides, a novel on vaccines and disease by John Philip Ryan, read to you by the author. Chapter 2, Saving Sage. This part 1 is about Hib meningitis. Dr. Stanley was tired, but then again he was always tired. He thought he'd have gotten used to working the ER night shifts by now, 6 months of trying to switch his days and nights around, but no, his brain still thought he should be asleep right now instead of being awake saving lives. What time is it anyway, he thought, then groaned as the wall clock in the doctor's workroom laughed at him that it was only 2:15 a.m. 6 more hours of this? Ugh. Well, Jack, up you go. Step to it. His second wind sailed him out into the hallway while he pulled up the next patient on his iPad. A 7-week-old with fever? That sucks. Jack liked being an ER doctor, but the pediatric side of the job wasn't his favorite, to say the least. He didn't have kids, yet, and he didn't really understand them. Parents confused him even more. Why do they have to ask 100 questions, even for the simplest of medical problems? And babies with fevers are the worst. Well, the parents of babies with fevers are the worst, he corrected himself. He had as much empathy for sick babies as any doctor, but trying to explain to worried parents that their febrile baby needed an array of medical tests to rule out severe infection and to convince the parents to consent to the testing was a task Jack didn't relish. Enough whining, Jack. You signed up for this. Hello, Mrs. Gonzalez, Mr. Gonzalez, he introduced himself as he approached the two worried-looking parents sitting in the exam area. I'm Dr. Stanley, and I understand your baby has had a fever for the past 6 hours? Yes, doctor. Thank you for seeing us. The father stood up as his wife continued to try to nurse the baby. We think our baby is pretty sick. He won't nurse. He's very lethargic. And when he is awake, he is extremely irritable. Our pediatrician told us to bring him in and to not give him any Tylenol yet so he could be properly assessed. Smart pediatrician, thought Jack, at least for a baby this young. Jack proceeded with the exam, letting the baby stay in Mom's arms for most of it since he was currently so quiet. Or extremely lethargic, Jack corrected himself, his concern for this particular baby growing with every minute. He had Mom transfer the baby to the exam table so he could check out a few more things, and the baby lost it, back arching, screaming. Jack lifted the baby's head off the table to check for nuchal rigidity, and, damn, yep, here we go. The usual, your baby may have meningitis and we need to do a spinal tap speech that I don't have to use very often, but always works in the end. We are worried our baby may have meningitis, offered Mr. Gonzalez as his wife picked the baby up. We know it's so rare and we didn't think it would happen to our baby, but he has all the signs. Jack couldn't hide his surprise. Smart parents. He slid his speech back into its mental file and pulled out his spinal tap in layman's terms explanation, but Mrs. Gonzalez beat him to it. We know you'll probably have to do a spinal tap, Mrs. Gonzalez spoke up for the first time through her tears. Do whatever you need to. Just please make sure our baby is okay. That's all she could manage before she broke down again, hugging her baby close. You are both right, Jack confirmed, realizing he could just get right to the point with these obviously intelligent parents. I am concerned about your baby. I will have the nurse start an IV, draw some blood for testing, get a urine sample, and then I will do the spinal tap, and we will probably start antibiotics right after that. And don't worry, Jack put one hand on Dad's shoulder and his other on Mom's. We'll do this as quickly as we can so your baby can get started on treatment, if it really is an infection. An hour later, the spinal tap done and the Gonzalez baby's labs cooking, Jack was trying to catch a few minutes of rest in the workroom before he expected the results to start coming in. Doctor, we have another one, said Lisa, the nurse who was also on the Gonzalez case with him, as she briefly stuck her head in through the doorway. Thanks, nurse. Jack knew Lisa was one of the ER nurses with a sense of humor, and he liked to respectfully call her and a few others nurse, just as they liked to call him doctor right back. He was smart enough to know who really deserved all the respect in a job like this. He caught up with her halfway down the hallway. Another 2-month-old, but I'm not as worried about this one, explained Lisa, handing Jack the iPad. This baby has had all her shots. The Gonzalez baby, on the other hand, hasn't had his shots. He's a week too young to have gotten them yet anyway. Bad timing. But this new baby, Baby Johnson, the parents marked in the history that she's had all her shots so far. So it's probably not meningitis, Jack agreed. Well, let's see what it is then. Darla Johnson had never seen one of her children look this sick. Her husband was home with the other 3 kids, and this was her first time in an emergency room. Her arms, legs, and back were aching from having to bounce her child around all day and now half the night. She looked up as a middle-aged doctor approached her and introduced himself. Please help us, Darla begged. She won't stop screaming. She had to talk loudly to be heard over the baby's wailing. How long has he been like this? Asked Jack, watching the mom bounce back and forth, patting the baby in vain. Since yesterday afternoon. I don't get it. We just had her 2-month-old checkup yesterday morning. The doctor said she was fine. As we drove home, this started, and she hasn't stopped screaming ever since. Nothing will console her. She won't take her bottle. She hasn't slept a wink, and neither have I. I just don't get it. Maybe it's just colic or gas, offered Jack, but let's take a look. Jack hadn't found anything wrong with baby number 2 on exam, except for the nonstop screaming. He discussed colic with the mom, but was now starting to rethink that diagnosis because 2 months was a little late for colic to just be starting, and this was way worse than just simple gas pain. He wondered. The lab called with a preliminary finding on Gonzalez, announced Lisa, walking into the workroom. Gram-negative coccobacilli in the CSF, lots of them, consistent with Haemophilus. Full identification will take another 24 hours, and white blood cells too numerous to count, so it's definitely meningitis. Damn, muttered Jack, although not surprised. In fact, he told Lisa to get the IV antibiotics ready with a proper dosing, just in case. Hang the 2 antibiotics. I'll call the peds floor and let them know we have an admission. 2 minutes later, Jack finished explaining the case to the pediatrician hospitalist over the phone. Haemophilus influenza, really? Haven't seen that in decades. Not since the Hib vaccine came out in the late 80s? Me neither, agreed Jack. The lab isn't certain it's type B yet, of course. We'll know tomorrow. But yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a case of this particular bacterial meningitis. Figured it was pretty much eradicated. Close, said the ped. I was reading about it the other day. For the past decade, there have only been between 10 and 25 cases of Hib meningitis every year in the United States. Not like in the 70s and 80s when I saw one every single month. Not to mention epiglottitis. Remember that? Babies coming in, barely able to breathe. That was almost scarier than the meningitis. Was really glad when this vaccine came out. Haemophilus is an interesting germ, though. Type B is the strain covered by the vaccine, so we rarely see it anymore. But Haemophilus influenza type A and non-typeable Haemophilus are still around. They just don't make people nearly as sick. Would be nice to have a vaccine against those, too. Thanks for the history lesson, smiled Jack, and I agree. Not having to deal with Hib epiglottitis and meningitis anymore makes my job much easier. Although the vaccine wouldn't have mattered in this particular case. The baby is about a week too young to have gotten it. Actually, you can get Hib vaccine as young as 6 weeks of age, but yeah, most doctors just start giving all the shots at the 2-month checkup. Dang, bad timing for this baby, I guess. I almost hope it's not type B. Might help the parents feel better knowing they couldn't have done anything to prevent it. Hey, speaking of all the shots, can I pick your brain about a second case I have down here? I don't think it's an admission, but it's right up your alley. Fire away. I love talking about sick children at 4 a.m. So, I have a baby who did just get all her shots yesterday, and Jack explained the whole story. Sounds like a typical vaccine reaction. Happens all the time, answered the pede. A little too casually, Jack thought. Although we don't like to call them reactions because that implies the vaccine may have actually caused what's going on. We call them adverse events after vaccination, because most of these are just coincidental anyway. Saw a lot of this back when I worked at the clinic. Parents used to call back all the time because their babies were screaming. Tylenol usually did the trick. Well, this particular baby is seriously screaming, nonstop since she got here an hour ago. And according to the mom, it's been over 12 hours now. Oh, parents always exaggerate this type of thing, dismissed the pede. I mean, I rarely saw these babies when they were screaming because we wouldn't tell the parents to come back into the office, of course. Just Tylenol and call us in another day or two. They never did call back after that. I don't know if I could take this kind of thing in my own child. Not that that's happening anytime soon. So you think this could just be from the vaccines? Yep, if there's nothing concerning on exam and no fever or other history of illness, just dose him up and ship him out, concluded the peds doctor. Got it, agreed Jack. And good luck with this meningitis baby. Gonzalez is the name. I'll be watching for the specific bacterial identification tomorrow because now I'm curious. See ya. Jack finished up the paperwork on the Johnson baby. He didn't know how to code the visit with the diagnosis of a suspected vaccine reaction, so he just put colic instead. Close enough, he figured. Jim Remington was still learning the ropes in his new position as chief of Section 2 of the Media Division at the Center for the Progress of Medicine. That downward trend on hepatitis B vaccine uptake had kept him busy for another week. Then he'd been promoted to a supervisory role, and Francine had scored the head slot for the entire media division. Jim much preferred delving into data and numbers himself rather than supervising others in their work to keep the public informed about disease outbreaks. But he also knew he needed to stay where the fun was, and following his boss up the ladder would keep him closer to the fun. Jim had first scored this job here a few years ago right after Zika hit. This new and mysterious virus had been a windfall for the center. The media division had expanded into 5 sections and hired on about 100 new employees, and they'd worked tirelessly to make sure the American public developed a healthy respect for Zika. It's amazing how far one can go with a few brain-damaged babies at your disposal, Jim recalled Francine's comment when they'd chatted about this the first night he'd spent with her, which still surprised him now, even coming from her. But she was right. The American public had bought it hook, line, and sinker. And Congress was even easier. Convince the public that their babies are in danger, scared moms start calling their senators and congressmen to save them, and bam, another few $1 billion gets routed to the CDC so they can go to work. Disease prevention, travel advisories, research to show how dangerous Zika is. Then several pharmaceutical companies, independently of course, begin preliminary research on a vaccine to meet the needs of the new market. And the Center for the Progress of Medicine was completely separated from all that. Started in the early 90s as a small private endeavor to serve the public by keeping careful track of vaccination rates and disease trends in the United States, the center had grown into a full-scale operation staffed by hundreds. And it wasn't government-run. It had no official ties to any government entity. It existed solely to collect the data and pass it along to those who could make good use of it to serve the public good, like the media, government departments, and pharmaceutical companies. But that was controlled by the people upstairs, literally. Jim had never met Francine's bosses, and he wasn't sure she had ever seen them face to face either. He'd heard her refer to a group called the Three, but didn't really know who or what that was. For all he knew, Francine was one of the people upstairs, but liked to work down here instead, where all the action was. Jim had loved his prior research and stats work, and heading up a whole media section was new to him. He was a fast learner, though, and Francine was amazing at this, like she was born for it. Jim suspected she'd seen to his promotion just to keep him closer to her, but he didn't mind, not at all. Francine had thought Zika was going to keep them busy, much longer than Ebola had. Ebola, reminisced Jim. That was a few $100 million well spent for a disease that had zero chance of spreading to the United States. But then again, fear reigns. And now people were beginning to realize that Zika might not be worth devoting billions of dollars to either. Much of Europe was laughing at America over this. The world had much bigger problems to solve: war, starvation, real actual disease outbreaks. Researchers published conflicting data. Zika causes brain damage to almost everyone who catches it. No, it doesn't. It's harmless to virtually everyone. So some of the money had dried up and the media division had taken a hit. They were now down to only 3 sections out of the original 5, but there was still plenty of work for them. Media has never had fewer than 2 sections. It's hard work to keep 350 million Americans informed. Before Zika, there was measles, briefly, but the higher-ups knew that measles outbreaks are very short-lived, even when they start somewhere like Disneyland. They tried to make the most of it, focusing on debunked autism myths and disgraced doctors. Then they got lucky with the Somalis in Minnesota, but that didn't end up going anywhere either. Only 70 or so had gotten infected, and they expected way more than that in such an unvaccinated population. And of course, no deaths. Thank God. Francine had made another comment back then that had surprised Jim. There's nothing like a good death or two to get all the naysayers to rush into the doctor to get their damn shots. He knew she would never actually wish for any deaths, but wondered if she had a point. Would an occasional death or two help keep vaccines higher? Jim knew very little about this back when he was just a numbers guy. Maybe this whole media thing is more fascinating. Interesting or not, he had work to do. He browsed through the day's news stories but found nothing. Is it too early for lunch, he wondered. Crap, it's only 11:30? Jim's phone rang. He waited until the 4th ring to pick it up so he could look busy. Jim, it's Tony. I've got something for you. Tony was still one of the underlings stuck back in research and stats, and he was always among the first to know about any disease outbreaks. Let me guess, more measles? Maybe chickenpox? A new flu strain? Nope, answered Tony. Jim could actually hear the excitement over the phone line. What the hell? Okay, just spit it out. I'm hungry and I'm not in the mood. Meningitis, Tony revealed. Jim rolled his eyes. That's all? Dude, there are like a dozen different causes of meningitis, and we don't even have a vaccine for most of them. And meningococcal meningitis is pretty much a constant in our country, although a very rare constant. Section 1 handles meningococcal disease anyway, so why are you calling me? Not just any meningitis, Jim. Hib meningitis. I'm talking Haemophilus influenza type B. Hemi what? Influenza? You mean the flu? No, Haemophilus influenza is a bacterium, and type B is the most dangerous type, apparently. I didn't even know anything about it until I got the laboratory alert from Washington State. I had to look it up. So what does this have to do with me? One case of meningitis does not a news story make, unless... Jim sat up in his chair. Unless the baby died? Oh God, did he die? Thank God, no. But it's still usable. The kid was unvaccinated. Ah, there it is, Jim realized. The possible media angles were already starting to spin in his head, and he knew Francine would get seriously excited over this. And when she got excited, Jim snapped out of it. He'd think about that later. I already emailed you the details, Jim heard Tony explaining, but I thought it was worth a phone call too. Thanks, buddy. Jim hung up the phone. So much for a long lunch. He'd schedule a group meeting for his people and Francine right away. They'd probably work all day on this and into the night. He just hoped Francine wouldn't be too tired when he drove her back to her place later. But then again, she seemed to have the most energy whenever a health crisis came their way. Okay, people, listen up. Francine's commanding presence brought the room to order. You've all read the summary on baby Pablo Gonzalez. He's out of the hospital and is doing very well. He was one lucky little baby. Apparently, his parents are pretty smart, suspected he had meningitis and went to the ER right away. As you all know, meningitis can be pretty bad, especially Hib meningitis, if diagnosis and treatment are delayed. Although it has one of the lower fatality rates of the various meningitis diseases, only about 5%, it does have a 25% complication rate. According to the hospital records, the baby didn't pass his hearing test in the right ear the day before being discharged. So we will definitely want to play up the hearing loss angle. It's been a while since we had any Hib to play with. Were any of you around in 2008 when this department last had to deal with it? A middle-aged man raised his hand. Anthony Appleton, ma'am, he announced. Been around a while. Back in '08, we had 4 kids die from Hib meningitis in Minnesota, including a 4-year-old who wasn't vaccinated. We got national coverage for weeks with a message that Hib disease was on the rise and that it can spread like an epidemic. Hib vaccine acceptance went way up, especially in Minnesota and the surrounding states. But since then, it's been fairly quiet. Francine wondered what Anthony was still doing here as a low-level media jockey. Maybe he just has no ambition, she thought. Okay, well, for Gonzalez, we'll start with the local evening news. They should be headed out to the family's home as we speak. We'll play up the hearing loss, but we have to make a decision on 2 other competing angles. I'm not sure whether we paint him as an unvaccinated baby or if we spin the angle that he is too young to be vaccinated yet. Both are true, although the second choice is more true. The Hib vaccine isn't really due on the schedule until 2 months, and this baby was only 7 weeks old. But the CDC does allow early vaccination as early as 6 weeks, so he could have been vaccinated if he'd had an early checkup. But that may be pushing things a bit. Both angles have value, but in this case we have to pick one because we obviously can't say both. Jim, did you get any useful data from the focus group? Yes, actually, Jim sat up straighter. This department tested the question on several different focus groups during Disneyland. The data I could find were very clear. People showed a lot more sympathy toward an infected baby who is too young to be vaccinated yet, compared to a child who caught the disease because the parents had chosen not to vaccinate. Although these focus groups were dealing with measles, not meningitis. No one's ever run any scenarios on infant meningitis because it's too rare. And we don't have time to run a fresh focus group right now. Francine looked a bit frustrated. She nodded toward Anthony, who had raised his hands again. Geez, what is this, kindergarten? I was part of those focus group sessions, and what was interesting, but I don't think it made it into the summary analysis, was the anger factor. While it is true that the public had a lot more sympathy toward babies who were less than 1 and couldn't get the measles vaccine yet, they were also a lot more angry at whoever caught the disease and then exposed a young, vulnerable baby. Angrier compared to their general feelings towards unvaccinated children. It was like the public accepted the fact that some families choose not to vaccinate and don't think it's a big deal, especially since they feel safe because their own kids are vaccinated. But throw a little baby into the mix who's too young to get a vaccine, and an unvaccinated kid infects that baby? Whoa, watch out. That really struck some nerves, and people were scrambling to catch up on their missing MMR vaccines for over a year. Well, Hib doesn't spread around like measles, corrected Francine, still wondering why Anthony, who seemed to know his stuff, was still in this low-level position. And we don't even know who infected this baby. Hib usually just strikes randomly, out of nowhere, without a source. It doesn't cause outbreaks. Francine held up her hand for quiet so she could think for a minute. Anthony's hand interrupted her thoughts. Yes, Anthony? The outbreak angle had a huge effect during the '08 Hib cases in Minnesota. The public really bought headlines like worst meningitis outbreak in 20 years and resurgence of infant meningitis. Well, if we see more cases, we'll play that up, of course, agreed Francine. Maybe we'll plant that idea. However, parents are smarter than they used to be thanks to the effing internet, so we have to be careful. Let me think. For now, I think it's too risky to play the unvaccinated angle, as some may realize the age discrepancy. Let's play up the fact that this poor little baby was too young to have gotten his first shots yet. That should help us get more on time vaccination compliance, as well as an uptake specifically for Hib vaccine. Who covers the supply pipeline? Anthony raised his hand. Wondered Francine. I wonder if Mr. Appleton has his hand in the cookie jar, and that's why he's stayed in his current position for so long. Okay, you will let the pharmaceutical companies know to increase Hib vaccine production. I think they will be able to bank on at least a 10% boon for the next 6 months. And so will you lucky bastard. Although Francine knew she had her own ways to make bonuses as well. Okay, team, I will handle the local news story myself just to make sure they get it right. We need to downplay some of the facts, like how rare Hib really is. And let's just call it infant meningitis without trying to confuse people with medical jargon. Social media team, reach out to all your bloggers and have them start spreading stories about the dangers of meningitis. Broadcast news team, once the local coverage airs, get on the phone to the regional and national producers so they can run with it. Print news, you know what to do as well. By this time tomorrow, I want every little mommy in America who hasn't given her baby a Hib vaccine in tears. Real tears, people. Meeting over and back at his desk, Anthony called his stockbroker. Jerry had always warned him not to send emails, since they were easier to trace back. Jer, it's Anthony. Can you see if you can scrounge up about $10K worth of stock in the top 3? I have this feeling. Sarah Sanderson held one hand over her ear as she listened intently on her cell phone in the passenger seat of the News 17 van. Infant meningitis used to affect 20,000 American children every year, virtually eradicated since the vaccine's introduction in the 80s. Vulnerable infants, check with your doctor to make sure your baby is up to date on all vaccines, safe and effective, of course. First reported case in Washington in over 5 years. Resurgence of this fatal infection? Okay, I got it. Pretty much the usual. Thanks for the heads up, Francie. Sarah hung up and glanced at her notes, barely legible due to the rural road she found herself driving down on a Sunday afternoon. Tommy, her cameraman/driver/sound guy, was probably hitting every bump on purpose during the phone call, as he always liked to do when she was doing homework on the way to his story. She sat back in her seat, unwilling to accuse him of sabotage because that would start up a conversation with the world's most annoying small talker. Sarah wanted to collect her thoughts and get this story right. She pulled up the Gonzalez's address on her Maps app just to make sure Tommy knew where he was going. Her phone estimated she had about 10 minutes until showtime. Ruben Gonzalez turned the minivan into the rural neighborhood development, glad to almost be home. Although the past 10 days in the hospital with baby Pablo had been trying, the course of treatment and his recovery had ended up feeling fairly routine. Paulina was a trooper and held the baby the whole time, nursing him so much that the nurses turned off the continuous IV drip the second day. After that, it was simply a matter of twice daily IV antibiotics. Pablo perked up after 2 days and now seemed like nothing had ever happened. Except for the failed hearing test in one ear, Ruben corrected himself. That came as a surprise. The doctor told them they do see it in a very small percentage of Hib meningitis cases. But on the bright side, he only suffered about 50% hearing loss in that ear, and the other ear is fine. He looked at his wife in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat next to the baby. He missed the days when she sat up front next to him in his Dodge Charger. Getting rid of that for this minivan was still painful, he thought, but not as painful as losing Pablo would have been. I wonder if Paulina and I are making the right decision about vaccines. The couple kept their plans secret while in the hospital. They knew that none of the hospital staff blamed them for Pablo's illness because he just so happened to catch it a week before his first vaccines were due. I wonder what they would have said if Pablo caught this vaccine-preventable disease a few weeks after we'd skipped his shots, he mused. He didn't even want to think about that. Paulina and Ruben Gonzalez had spent months researching vaccines during their pregnancy. They read 3 books and as much CDC information as they could find, filtering out what was obvious propaganda and absorbing all the pertinent real medical information. They concluded that the risks of getting the entire schedule of 70 childhood vaccine doses, 24 of which were grouped into the first 6 months of life, were higher than the dangers presented by the disease the vaccines were designed to prevent. In other words, the statistical likelihood of suffering a severe vaccine reaction was much higher than the statistical likelihood that baby Pablo would catch a severe case of a disease and be harmed or be killed by it. At least that's what he and his wife concluded. They'd considered getting a few of the most important shots, one of which was Hib, but since it was so incredibly rare, they decided they would opt out for the first year or 2 and then see how they felt. "So how do you feel now, Ruben?" he asked himself. "Did you make the right call? Did you make the right decision that would protect your baby from harm? Or did you put him in danger by not vaccinating?" It was easy to answer this now, since Pablo is basically all right. They could live with some moderate hearing loss in one ear. But what I couldn't live with is a severe vaccine reaction if we rolled the dice that way and he suffered harm, he told himself honestly. We are making the right choice, and we are educated enough to recognize when our baby got sick. We sought treatment right away, and now he's fine. We are good parents, and we are just trying to make the best, safest decision we can. He knew Paulina felt less secure about their plan to skip all vaccines now, given that Pablo had caught one such disease. But she was still dealing with the guilt of letting her baby catch meningitis, as she put it. That's how she sees it. No one else blames her, especially me. But what mom wouldn't feel guilty when her baby has to go through something like this? It's good to be the dad, I guess. Less guilt, less work, but more responsibility. He looked forward to asking Dr. Tommaso what he thought about their choice when they saw him for a follow-up appointment in a few days. He already seemed pretty understanding of their decision when they asked about vaccines at their newborn checkup. But Ruben wondered if the doctor would... "What the?" he exclaimed as he pulled up to their house. Sarah watched as the Gonzalezes, she assumed, pulled into the driveway of their mid-sized suburban home. "Here they are, Tommy. Start rolling." Sarah knew she technically wasn't supposed to follow the minivan up the driveway onto their private property, but she figured this family wouldn't know the law. Plus, they needed to get some close-up shots to really capture the human side of the story. "Hello, Mr. Gonzalez," she started as the 30-something man got out of the driver's seat of the minivan, making sure she stayed slightly to the side so Tommy could get them all in the shot. "I'm Sarah Sanderson with News 17. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your baby's battle with meningitis?" How did you..." Mr. Gonzalez trailed off, looking uncertainly from Sarah to the camera and back. "We received word that your baby caught what used to be a rare form of infant meningitis and now seems to be on the rise again. How is your baby doing?" The sliding door of the minivan began to open, but Mr. Gonzalez put his hand out to stop the door from opening further. "Thank you for asking, Miss Sanderson, did you say? Our baby is doing just fine, and we are happy to be home." Quick recovery, Sarah thought. He seems pretty confident and comfortable in front of a camera, but I don't think he's going to give me very long. "I understand your little one is too young to have started his vaccines yet. How do you feel that someone somewhere must have exposed him to this deadly disease?" "Miss Sanderson," he seemed to stand up a little straighter and moved protectively in front of the gap in the door as Tommy swung around to try to get a shot of mom and baby inside. "Thank you so much for your concern. Yes, this has been a tough week for our family. We are happy to be home, and we would appreciate you respecting our privacy and our property and allowing us to get settled back into our lives." Damn, she thought. He said both P words. Sarah knew that nothing shot after this point would be legally usable, so she decided she better cut her losses so there'd at least be some humanizing footage. She turned to Tommy and gave him the cut sign. As she started back away down the driveway to demonstrate her goodwill, she followed up with, "Your baby has just turned 2 months while in the hospital. I assume you were looking forward to beginning his 2-month vaccinations so that you don't have to go through something like this ever again." Bam, she smiled. "Good afternoon, Miss Sanderson, and again, thank you for your obvious concern."